allergic to poison ivy. So Ricky, when I say it could be worse, he would get poison ivy if he got anywhere close to it. He would get it from the air, and he would get it in his lungs. And it was like a bad deal always.
I think the Lord was not that.
Right. I want to praise the Lord for answered prayer too. I haven't made this a public prayer request. It's just something I've been praying about for a while. My sister's church is looking for a pastor. My mother-in-law's church looking for a pastor, and my dad's church is looking for a pastor. And of those three, the hard one is going to be my dad's church because it's very small. But he told me they got one, so decided, and we're thankful for that. And it's a pastor from years ago. That church has been a small, struggling church for as long as I've known, except for a brief time. About the time I was in college, there was a span of years where it grew and it was really thriving. And that is the pastor that's going to come back, and he's retired now, and he's just going to come back and spend some time there. So that was a good thing. My sister's church, it's Kansas City First. They'll have they've narrowed theirs down from 10 possibilities to 3, and they'll pick one soon. That's not a church that's going to have long to go without. And Rachel's mother's church is not a Nazarene church. I don't know how they do their deal, but they'll get one soon, I would guess. But when they're without, it's difficult.
As long as they all get one and you stay here.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to be a Baptist, so it's her. She goes to a Baptist church. They wouldn't want me. They wouldn't want me for a number of reasons. All right. Anyway, sometimes when I am preparing to preach or teach, I have moments of feeling a little nervous. I wonder how people might react to what I'm going to say. And I realize as I prepare this little introduction, there's a decent chance that I'm going to say something that some of you will disagree with. And I want to assure you I'm not trying to be disagreeable. But here it is. I've noticed that there are a lot of people in the world that like animals a lot more than I do. I like to look at animals. I love to go look at the deer. I can spot deer. My dad trained me well. I can drive and spot deer. Rachel thinks I'm not watching the road. I'm watching the road, and I picked that deer out 300 yards away that just stuck his head up above the thing. I like to watch them. I'm just talking about the kind of animals that like live at your house and do all that thing. The idea that really the animals are a lot like people. So here's a quote that illustrates this. Animals are reliable, many full of love, true in their affections, predictable in their actions, grateful and loyal. Difficult standards for people to live up to. That's by a guy named Alfred Armand Montpere. What? Okay. Apparently this guy was a philosopher who lived in the last century. This is the sort of like anthropomorphic drivel that just really gets me. Anthropomorphic means when you make animals out like people. The idea that animals smile. They love, they hate, they whatever. I know you might disagree with me. I'm not claiming it's a biblical issue. It's just my opinion, and I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I could. Anyway, tonight a number of different animals are mentioned and discussed, and they're used as examples. And I think that Agur has found perhaps more meaningful connections than the one that philosopher came up with. I like your pets. In fact, I'm glad that you have them, and I'm glad that you have them. I don't mind coming and seeing your pet. I'm just glad I don't bring it home with me. There's no real outline for this passage, but we do see a recurring theme of fours. Sets of four. There are 5 sayings that list 4 items. And usually they're in like a 3 things plus 1 kind of format. And these 4 sayings are interspersed with single unrelated sayings. So we're picking up in the middle of chapter 30. We did the first 14 verses last week, and we're picking up with 15, which starts off with the animals. The leech has 2 daughters. Give and give. One of my favorite verses. The leech. I think in the King James, I didn't look. I think in the King James it's the horse leech. I think it is. The horse leech has 2 daughters. Give and give. Whenever I think about leeches, I inevitably am reminded of a movie that I loved growing up. My favorite Hollywood actors, Humphrey Bogart, the African Queen, taking the boat, taking that woman, no, she's a missionary, taking her through the I don't know, the Congo or something, or the, what's that great gray, green, greasy Limpopo. Yeah, maybe it's the Limpopo River. I don't know, but they're going through, and at one point he gets stuck. He gets out of the boat, and it's like this marshy area, and he's hauling it along while she's in there. And he kind of gets it through that spot. When he gets back in, he takes his shirt off. He's got leeches all over him. Like, it makes me shiver every time I see that. Leeches would bother me a lot more if I was in the water a lot more. Leeches are like one step above a slug. Yeah. Leeches have a sucker at both ends of their body. And the writer, Ager here, and a surprising number of commentators were of the opinion that they had a mouth in both. I looked at it. They don't really have more than one mouth. But they do have these 2 suckers on each end. And so that's the give and give. It's as though they got to have 2 because they just keep bringing it in. The image, I mean, they just have the one mouth, but the image is still sound. Leeches are parasites. They take. They don't give. They just take. They have this one mouth, even though they got that other sucker as well. But in that one mouth, they have 3 jaws. And each jaw has teeth. And when they get on you, or whatever, they make a little Y-shaped cut with their 3 jaws. And when they make that Y-shaped cut, their saliva, whatever, their juices have this anticoagulant and a numbing thing. So you don't really feel it, and then they numb you, and then it's anticoagulant, so the blood keeps flowing freely. And that's how they get their food. Are they ever satisfied? Well, no. Because it's their food. See, the leech isn't mean. We don't want to anthropomorphize the leech. It's not mean. It doesn't have a scowl on its face. It doesn't really have much of a face. It does this because the Lord ordained it to do this. But to us, it just seems like a terrible thing because it's a taker. It doesn't provide any service. It's not like a positive thing. Where would we be without the leeches? Yeah, probably better. It might not be completely polite to point it out, but the leech is an example here because there are people who are takers. I mean, I could say it otherwise, but it'd be a fantasy. There are people who are takers. They just take. They don't give. It's not that God doesn't love them. He does. He wants better for them. But they do. There are people like this that they are takers. And they're never satisfied. There never comes a point where they're like, okay, wow, we're good now. Now I'm going to be productive. No, they're not. No, they don't come to that point where, well, we've had enough now. No. And Ager, the guy that wrote this chapter, he doesn't really offer any counsel on dealing with them, which kind of seems like he's saying, you just need to be aware that there are people like this. That there are people like this in the world, and wisdom would have us to see who they are, not so we can keep them at arm's length, and not so that we can be unkind to them, and not so that we can just always, no. Because it's okay to be wise and shrewd and not be taken in. Because giving them what they're always asking for is not necessarily solving any problem. Because they're like the leech. I'm just going to let the leech suck just a little bit. And then you'll get full and just drop off and I'll be good. No, he won't. He won't get full and he won't drop off. He'll hang on there, pass that blood through his digestive tract and just keep sucking more. You got to be careful. Yes, Missy.
They're also used in the medical field, hospitals.
In some, yeah. Because they're used, yeah, it's like I was going to say a win-win, but it seems like a lose-win to me. The leech wins. But, yeah. Speaking of never being satisfied, we get into the next verse. There are 3 things that are never satisfied. 4 never say enough. And this is this 3 things plus one more thing kind of format. It's like a poem, remember? This is all poetic. There are 3 things that are never satisfied. 4 never say enough. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and the fire never says enough. So, kind of continuing with this never enough theme, I guess not all the single statements are completely disconnected. We're presented with these 4 things that are never satisfied. 4 things that never reach the limit. The grave never seems to reach a saturation point. It just never does. There are new people born every day. If I'd been thinking, I would have looked up how many people are born on average every day. It's millions. And every one of them have a grave awaiting them. And every day, tomorrow, is unique in my monthly calendar, but it's not unique. In fact, I'm going to be working with people that make their living because there's a steady stream of people in need of a grave. We have to be be faced with the fact that the grave awaits every day. The grave is actually our fault. There's never supposed to be any such thing as a grave. That's not God's plan. When people say things like, well, death, it's a natural part of life. No, it's not. No, it's not. Now, if you read your Bible, death is a penalty. Death is a wage that we weren't supposed to earn. Death is not natural. It wasn't God's idea. It was a penalty. The great news that Agar never really saw was that there is coming a day, not when the grave will have had enough, but when it will just go without. Because Jesus has conquered death in the grave, and Jesus lives. And because he is the first fruits, as I will preach tomorrow, he's the first fruits of resurrection, and that implies that there's going to be more. And the graves that were part of this never enough are suddenly going to be vacated with no new business. It's a good thing. He's going to come again, and a day is coming, very close now, when the grave will only be something that we used to deal with. There may come a day, sooner than you think, where you are chatting with a friend and you think, you remember when we used to be worried about the grave? I don't have to worry about that anymore. That's a good thing. So, that's the grave. Before our modern day, the last 50 years or so, when we decided that regular child sacrifice was actually a reasonable course of action, one to be supported and fought for vigorously on our political campaigns, women used to bemoan not being able to have children. In the Bible, they had a word for it, being barren. Even the word itself bespeaks how they feel about it. You don't hear too many people today talk about being barren. You don't. I can't think of the last time I heard somebody say they were barren. I hear them talk about the idea of being barren in that accepted but completely inappropriate way of saying, well, we're trying to have a baby. Stop. Stop. Don't say that. I just like, don't say that. Well, Pastor, that's what they... Yeah, I know. What's it mean? Don't say that. Okay, but barrenness is bad. We don't use it anymore. We might wonder about the enough connection, because maybe Agar is not looking at the barren womb from an individual point of view, but as a concept of barrenness. In those days, it wasn't the kind of thing that just like happened once in a generation. In those days, it would not be uncommon for them to hear about someone that was barren. Hannah was at the temple crying so much and praying so vigorously that Eli thought she was drunk. No, she's praying because she's upset because she's barren. It is a thing that is sucking the life out of her. And she prayed for that. She prayed for new life. And God gave her Samuel. And then a whole bunch of other kids. Then we come to the earth, not satisfied with water. We were talking, Rachel and I were talking to a landscaper yesterday, I guess. And he was telling us that there's been so little rain this summer that the ground is hard to the point that he doesn't want to do a lot of the regular jobs he might do because his digging tools, I'm assuming not a shovel, but something mechanical, it's hard on the equipment. The ground's so hard, it's hard on his equipment. He don't want to do that. He's waiting until it rains a little bit. That's how it is here in a dry summer. But see, in Israel, the climate was such that in the dry part of the year, which was an every year thing, that's the way it is there. You got the rainy season and you got the dry season, and I think the dry season's a lot longer than the rainy season. In the dry season, the ground is dry, the grass dries up. When we talked about the feeding of the 5,000 Sunday, it says it was at Passover, and it says they had them sit, there was grass there. It tells us there was grass. We're going to be like, well, okay, big deal, there was grass. No, he's reminding us it really was Passover. That's when there would be grass, because the rest of the year, the grass would have all burned off, and the ground would just be dry and hard. If it would rain when it didn't normally, the ground would soak it up and maybe not show much different. Now, Israel is not in the Sahara Desert. But imagine in the Sahara Desert if it were to rain. How much rain would they have to get before it didn't just soak it up? A lot, right? I mean, like an unimaginable amount. That's why he's saying here, the earth that is not, it says it never says enough. The earth not satisfied with water. And then the fire. Fires, they don't stop on their own. A fire is either extinguished by some other outward force, or it runs out of fuel. But provided nobody is working to extinguish it, and provided it has enough fuel, it will burn out. It'll just keep burning. It just burn and burn and burn. I'm glad that we live here and not where they have wildfires regularly. My son Ethan's mother-in-law lives in Auburn, California. When he got married and we were out there, they'd had a wildfire like the year before. And it was like from here just past the fellowship hall was like the burn mark from their house. Like, no thanks. Those fires they just burn and they just keep going. And they're an example of this never enough thing. These verses here, I guess, just speak to a general fallen world state of affairs. None of those things were supposed to be that way. It's just because of the sin, because of the fall, because of sin, that they are. Verse 17, the eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother The ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. So Agar here really is referencing the Ten Commandments. Honor your father and your mother. It'll go well with you in the land. That's one of the Ten Commandments. That honoring father and mother, at times it may seem like it's gone out of fashion, but the commandment has never really come off God's books. That's not a law they've done away with in God's economy. If you hear somebody say something like, oh, no, Pastor, Christians, we're New Testament, and we're not under law, but under grace, we're under those laws. We're under the Ten Commandments. The law we're not under. What Paul's talking about, you might recall when we went through Galatians, Paul's talking about we aren't under the law as a means of earning our salvation. I am not obeying the Ten Commandments as a means of earning favor with God. I obey the Ten Commandments because I am redeemed by God. When did God give the Ten Commandments to Israel?
After the Exodus.
After the Exodus. They were in slavery. He redeemed them from slavery. He made them his people. And then he told them the rules. He didn't give them the rules when they were in slavery. No, we are under the Ten Commandments. For a person that would argue that, I would just go to a couple of them. You could do it with any of them. So you're telling me that since I'm a New Testament Christian, it's okay if I murder now? It's going to be a hard sell. It's going to be hard to convince people of that. Since I'm a New Testament Christian, now I can be an idolater. I can have some other God before the one that I say saved me. No, we're under the Ten Commandments. Okay, so Agar is speaking to that when he talks about this eye that mocks his father. Jesus addressed it with the Pharisees. If we think Jesus, somehow we want to still think, well, maybe Jesus. Well, no, he talked to the Pharisees about their hypocrisy. You say you're like keeping the law, but you're hypocrites because you don't take care of your parents. Because you say, well, this is I'd like to help you out, Mom and Dad, but this is set aside. This is Corban. It's set aside for God, so I can't help you out. No, Jesus was saying, you're not honoring your father and mother. You're breaking that commandment. And he wasn't happy about it. The eye that gets picked at by ravens and eagles, that is a thing that can happen. But it's never happened to you because you're not dead. You have to be dead for that to happen. Because you've seen crows on the road doing their cleanup crew work. You never really get close to them as you're driving up, do you? Because they're skittish. If they're going to pick at your eye and you twitch, which you will if it's your eye, they're going to be gone. No, they're not picking your eye. You got to be dead. And so Agar is saying disrespect for parents is a sign of spiritual deadness. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. It's a really bad thing. None of us are of an age, even some of us still have our parents. None of us are of an age where we are under our parents' authority, like we're obeying them, that we ask them if we can do this or can do that, but we honor them in other ways. And if our parents aren't around, we honor other people's parents in lieu of that. Okay, verse 18. There are 3 things which are too wonderful for me, 4 which I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a virgin, a man with a maid. There's all sorts of translations. There's some really interesting translation differences in this chapter, depending on versions you use. Agar here is impressed with how things move in their own environment. The eagle is an air animal, and watching it in the air is an amazing thing. How is it like? It's up there just like chilling with its wings out. You don't often see eagles flap their wings. When they're taking off, you do. But when they're up there, you just watch. I mean, they're just gliding around. The snake on the land, the ship in the sea, they are examples of these animals in their environment. Then you get to the fourth one. Okay, so if they are all examples, all four of these, if they're examples of God's wonderful and sometimes mysterious created order, then the fourth one needs to be approached with wisdom and care also, the way a man is with a woman. Especially when we see what wrong attitudes in that regard do toward relationships, which takes us to the next verse. This is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done no wickedness. So I'm going to make a connection between those two little passages. Eagles don't swim, not on purpose. Snakes don't fly. Ships do everything they can to not be around rocks. If a man or a woman breaks out of the created order that God has ordained for them, no matter what terminology we might ascribe to it, there is a price to pay. An eagle in the water should be a bother. It should be a problem. I suppose in this day and age, if we saw an eagle in the water, there'd be somebody that would be willing to say, oh, that eagle, it might be like I guess it's a fish now. It's a trans fish. No, it's not. It's an eagle in the water. It's not in its place. And it's a bad thing. The eating and wiping of the mouth that it says here about this this woman, it's a way of saying that though she should be ashamed of what she's done, she's just really cavalier about it. I think we see this all the time. Shame is something that people used to feel. Shame used to be bad. Society has gone around making up their own commandments now because they don't like God's commandments. And they have done whatever they can to eradicate shame. I'll give you an example. And you're going to have to trust me that if you think that I'm sounding harsh, we can spend time after we're done and I'll explain myself more fully. I taught long enough that when I first taught, my third year of teaching, I had to do lunch duty. And I had to stand up by the secretary. The kids would come along with their money, pay for their lunch. Then after a while, we didn't do money anymore. They bought a ticket, and they paid with their ticket. Unless they were on free and reduced lunch, then they had a different colored ticket. Then that was bother because now those kids feel bad. They feel shame at having a different colored ticket. So then we didn't have that. Everybody just got a number. And then it's all coded in there. So nobody has to be like they don't know. I'm telling you they know. Okay? Anyway, so all of that to remove shame, except society isn't all about removing shame. They just want to make new versions of shame. They would shame on me for noticing that. It's a problem. Verse 21. For 3 things the earth is perturbed. Yes, for 4 it cannot bear up. For a servant when he reigns, a fool when he's filled with food, a hateful woman when she's married, and a maidservant who succeeds her mistress. By the way, I didn't finish my thing. So I said I taught long enough. So everybody paid. Some people got a ticket. Everybody had a ticket. The paid were a certain color, the others were another color. Everybody had a number, so nobody had to worry about. And the 4th stage is finally, everybody's free. Everybody's free. So you can't tell kids anymore there's no such thing as a free lunch because they're like holding their tray. And free breakfast. Thanks, you're paying for it.
Only if you get everything. If you leave something out,
Yeah.
they'll charge you.
Yeah. Okay, so don't get me started. You got a tray with this, and this. It's free. I only want that. Oh, no. You got to take it all. No, I'm not going to eat it all. That's okay. You got to take it. And it has to be thrown away. I saw it happen. A cook, when this first started happening, one of the lunch ladies was like, there's no way we're throwing away wrapped up food. And so she was getting it out of there. She almost got fired. Not because it was unsanitary. Anyway. Okay. So, the things that the earth is bothered by. A servant when he reigns, a fool when he's filled with food, a hateful woman when she's married, and a maidservant who succeeds her mistress. He speaks here to a set of circumstances that I think I can kind of relate to. I don't think I'm the only one. Injustice really bothers me. When things are just not like they ought to be, that bothers me. I think it bothers most of us. Things that shouldn't happen, but do. Let's just look at the first two here. A servant shouldn't reign. Agar may have had somebody in mind like Jeroboam. Jeroboam was not part of any royal family. He wasn't part of David's line. He wasn't even part of Saul's line. He was a servant. And he was a usurper. He grabbed authority and was the first king in the northern kingdom. How'd that work out? Terrible. Terrible. Now you can make the case, wasn't David kind of a servant before he was a king? Yes, but he didn't get it. He didn't grasp it himself. God picked him. That was different. A fool filled with food speaks to, again, this idea of getting something for nothing. No, the fool shouldn't be starved to death, of course, but to be filled with food speaks to a situation that, though they haven't worked for it, they don't just have enough, they have abundance. They have abundance. Now, just going back a minute to what I was saying about kids at school. It's ironic. Kids are dumb, and that's job security for teachers. But kids aren't dumb. They learn things that you didn't mean for them to learn. And this idea that you're going to give kids, every kid, a free lunch and it not affect the way they look at the world, it does. A friend of mine was an 8th grade teacher, and he had a girl in his class that never did anything. She didn't do her work. She showed up most of the time, but she just didn't do anything. And one day he was lecturing her that you would think sounded like what you might have heard as a teacher, or as a kid when you were growing up. And he was saying to her, this is not going to work out. What are you going to do when you grow up? And she said, I'm going to get on welfare.
Yeah.
And you think that's a good plan, he says. Well, it works for my mom. We got everything. We got this. We got this. We got a big TV. Well, I mean, it's not wrong. It did work for her. It shouldn't. That's what this is talking about. Okay. All right, 24. There are 4 things which are little on the earth, but they're exceedingly wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer. The rock badgers, if you're reading NIV, it says hyrax, are a feeble folk, yet they make their homes in the crags. The locusts have no king, yet they all advance in ranks. The spider, if you're reading the NIV, it probably says lizard. The spider skillfully grasps with its hands, and it is in kings' palaces. The ant is seen here as an example of wisdom. We've seen it already in Proverbs. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. It's seen as an example of wisdom, or rather it would be wise for us to emulate that one aspect of an ant's natural behavior. Because ants are not wise. They're not making choices. They didn't get together and have it would be better for... No. They are getting their food. No, like they get their food because the winter's coming. They don't know the winter's coming. If winter never came, they would still be stockpiling food. That's their nature. God made them that way, okay? They're not little people. But we see this one aspect of what they're doing, and we make application of it to our life. Hey, you know what? The ant stores up food. Maybe it'd be a good idea for me to plan ahead. That's what Agur is saying. He talks about the locust. They don't have a king, but they act like an army. Act like an army. The spider, or in a lizard, like a gecko, the sticky-footed kind. Those geckos, apparently in Bible times, were really disliked, like spiders to us. They don't like that thing, or a spider. They don't like it. It's gross to them. It's all these things. And yet, in many cases, it lives in a better house than you. That's what it's saying. It's living in the king's palace. Rent-free. Speaking of the animals this way, so you're speaking of pet dogs like, oh, look, he's smiling. No. No, he's not. Okay. It's a poetic way of describing a concept. We can learn from the animals as we make application. All right, we're on the home stretch. 29. There are 3 things which are majestic in pace, 4 which are stately in walk. A lion, which is mighty among beasts, and does not turn away from any. A greyhound, probably says rooster in your translation. These are words that are rarely used in the scripture. That's why there's it's kind of anybody's guess on some of these. A male goat, also, and a king whose troops are with him. Things that are stately in their walk. The king whose troops are with him. See, when his troops are with him, he can afford to be stately and strut around like a rooster, because he's got his backup. If he didn't have the backup, he might not do that. Verse 32, if you've been foolish in exalting yourself, or if you have devised evil, put your hand on your mouth. For as the churning of milk produces butter, and wringing the nose produces blood, so the forcing of wrath produces strife. I used to say to kids, and occasionally myself, self-appraisal is a dangerous thing. When somebody would say something about, wow, look at me, I've done this thing. Self-appraisal is a dangerous thing. It's foolish to exalt yourself. If you exalt yourself, there will be plenty of people around to try to kick you back down to size. And at least as far as Agur is concerned, it is akin to devising evil. Exalting yourself is akin to devising evil. I smile when I read the remedy. If you have been foolish in exalting yourself, or if you devise evil, put your hand on your mouth. Again, it reminds me of kids at school. Like, really? It takes your hand there? You don't just have the control not to say whatever? And that's what kids do. But the point is the same. It is to be on your guard. To be on your guard. Because those things produce strife. Just like these 3 things. Churning milk makes butter. Wringing the nose produces blood. I've never seen that happen. I'd be curious, not if it was me, but if it was somebody else, I'd be curious to see it happen. I believe it. Somebody grabs you hard enough on the nose, makes blood. The forcing of wrath produces strife. You might notice here that this is a set of 4, but there's only 3 things. One of the commentators I read, I kind of wish I'd thought of this because I think it makes sense. One of the commentators I read suggested that maybe there's not a 4th thing in this otherwise set of 4, because there's all these 4 things are this, 4 things are this, 4 things are this, and then there's 3. Maybe it's because it's leaving open the possibility that the advice has been taken not to do those things, not to exalt yourself, not to devise evil. Because you did that, you don't have a fourth category down here. That's the person that got it. They didn't end up down there. The fourth sequence is unnecessary. The fourth in the sequence is unnecessary because some change has been made. I think that makes a lot of sense. It also would be very poetic in a way of like creating the writing for getting a point across. And it's really the gospel, because you don't have to go around being a knucklehead all the time. God can really help us to be better than we are. If he can't, what are we doing here on a Wednesday night? You could have been watching the parade and getting candy.
We can do it right here.
Well, that's true. We don't even have to. We're like the horse leech, give and give. We don't even have to go after it. We don't have to take a bucket and sit on the sidewalk. You're right. Okay, you see what you've created. You start feeding the birds, they expect it. All right. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for a chance to be with your people and to share time together, singing your praise and praying, and connecting with you, connecting with one another, and thinking about your word. I pray that you would help us to know that we can be better than we are. And you're not sitting around expecting us to be. You're waiting to help us to be better. And we thank you for that, Lord. Just pray that you would attend to those requests we mentioned earlier and the ones that we didn't mention but that we're concerned about. In Jesus' name.